Welcome back, class. We're on the kind of the downhill slide on this particular chapter. We're going to jump into the fourth segment and ask the question, does monopoly have to earn a profit? I had a student at one point, I asked this question, and the individual said, well, absolutely. There's no other competition in the market. They have to earn a profit. Well, not necessarily so. Absence of competition doesn't guarantee profit. Remember, success is going to depend on the strength of demand. It's going to depend on the cost of production, and it's going to depend on if average total cost is greater than price. Remember, average total cost is greater than price. Even as a monopolist, you've got to have price has to be greater than average variable cost for you to stay in the market and continue to produce. And they talk, the example they gave in the book, it's somebody making or producing paper mache gnomes. Probably not a huge, probably not a huge demand for those. In the market, the cost of production, it's fairly laborious, and probably a lot of costs go into production. So just not a lot of activity, and probably not a lot of profit potential in paper mache gnomes. But you have other examples of individuals. Just they talk about patents and copyrights and barriers for entry, but it doesn't matter whether you have a patent or a copyright if you don't have something that's going to generate demand and have enough strength of demand that you're going to be able to sell it on the open market. I'm not sure that you're ever going to make a profit. So barriers to entry, lack of competition doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to make a profit, even if you are a monopolistic producer. If you're assessing the monopoly in the long run, perfectly competitive market provides consumers the greatest sustainable quantity of a good at the lowest possible price. Producers earn zero profits. So that's in the long run of perfect competition. And it's the especially at the lowest possible price, and producers earn zero profits. They earn zero profits because if they are earning greater than zero, you have individuals coming in and driving and competing those economic profits down. So that's your perfect competition. Again, provides consumers the greatest sustainable quality of a good at the lowest possible price, and producers get zero economic profits. Now, perfect competition. Let's think about the monopolist over here. The monopolist restricts output. Remember, they can set the output based on marginal revenue equal marginal cost. So they're going to restrict their output. They create scarcity. They ratchet up the prices, and they generate positive profits. And again, I think about Comcast and my cable company. They are just, every time I turn around, my cable bill is higher. So they've got the barriers to entry. They're the only game in town in my zip code, and they just keep. And I've got nobody that I can negotiate with. I can't even get them to answer the phone, much less talk to them. So it is a difficult position for me as a consumer. And that is kind of this is the combination that the monopolist has that impacts society. Again, restricts output, creates scarcity, ratchets up the prices, and generates positive profits. Great deal if you're a monopolist. Then the text starts talking a few minutes about efficiency, equity, and concentration of power. Remember, the quantity that the monopolist sells in equilibrium, or the desirable quantity, is where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Then they turn around, they charge the highest price possible, determined by this downward sloping demand curve. Always price is going to be greater than marginal revenue and going to be greater than, so if it's greater than marginal revenue, if the monopolist price is greater than marginal revenue, and marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, then with your transitivity that we talked about, I think with the competitive firm, then price is going to be greater than marginal cost. In perfect competition, price is competed down to marginal cost. So firms entering the market are going to drive that price down to marginal cost. Monopoly, barriers to entry, price is going to be greater than marginal cost. They have no competition to drive or compete that price down. And then they discuss for a few minutes a monopolist misuse of economic power. If price is greater than marginal cost, it starts to question efficiency because marginal revenue equal marginal cost. At that point, remember in one of the earlier chapters, we talk about it maximizes net efficiency. The price that the monopolist allows economic profit is paid by consumers. There they start questioning equity. Protect positive profits and they create barriers to entry. So that's the way that the monopolist goes about efficiency, equity, concentration of power. Then they spend a few minutes getting into a little more detail on these three concerns. So monopoly and efficiency. Economic efficiency is where the marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Price equals marginal cost in economic efficiency. With the monopoly, price is greater than marginal cost. Consumers purchase less of monopolist products than is economically efficient. Gains from potential exchange left on the table. Monopoly becomes richer, society poorer. Economic gains left on the table. Inefficiency, opportunity loss is called dead weight loss of monopoly. Remember, going back to, and I can't remember which chapter it was, but they were talking of the authors talked about consumer surplus and producer surplus. You remember they were talking about steaks, I think, was the example they used in the text. And consumer surplus is when a consumer will pay a price that is less than what they're willing to pay. And a producer surplus is when they receive a price that is greater than what they're willing to accept. So remember, in a negotiation strategy, consumer is setting that upper bound. That's the most they're willing to pay. And the producer is setting the lower bound. That's the least they're willing to accept. And if they come together and negotiate a price somewhere in the middle, you're going to end up with consumer surplus and producer surplus. Unfortunately, a lot of that is left on the table with the monopoly because there's not a lot of competition. They're the only game in town. Who are you going to negotiate with? Again, it goes back to my cable company. Who am I going to negotiate with? They're the only game in town. Monopoly and equity. So that's the rationale on the efficiency. You've got opportunities, inefficient opportunity loss because they're left on the table. And you end up with a dead weight loss of monopoly. Monopoly and equity. A portion of consumer surplus is transferred to the monopolist in this situation. Protected from competition by barriers to entry again. Where's your competition? Public policy suggests that monopolies should not extract gains from consumers. Well, I'm glad public policy thinks that, but why doesn't public policy come in and help me drive the price down on my cable with Comcast? Public policy imposes regulatory efforts to reduce the degree that monopoly firms can extract surpluses from consumers. And they may be setting these regulations, maybe without the government setting regulation, then my cable bill would be higher. I doubt it. But I don't see anything positive at this point to help me drive down the cost of my cable bill. Monopoly and the concentration of power. Objectives for the concentration of power run deeper than economic efficiency and high prices. Barriers to entry, and that's what drives the economy, the monopolist market power. It's the barriers to entry. That's what the monopolist or a monopoly market depends on to function and drive their profit margins, is the barriers to entry. Decentralized competitive markets, they satisfy customers. No incentive to find new. I mean, there's really, when you're looking at a monopoly, where's the incentive to satisfy customer? Where's the incentive to find new products? Where's the incentive, new and better production methods? Whittles away at economic cost, economic profits. Economic profit, the incentive and the means to protect and expand their position. They're going to control that economic profit as long as they can secure their position as a monopoly market, and they're going to try to expand that power. Influence political leaders, public authorities, attempt to use power of government to monopolize economic advantage. And if you remember when we were talking about the chapter on taxes, we talked a few minutes about rent seeking. It was right at the very end of that, and that's where firms will engage in, I guess, quid pro quo with government officials to help improve their competitive advantage. And so monopolists are engaged in rent-seeking behavior by trying to influence government officials to help drive their competitive advantage, to help not only build these barriers to entry, but to keep these barriers to entry in place. I've worked at Health Net, and well, they're now Centene, but a health plan. And when I worked at Health Net, we had a lot of business with the government, a lot of healthcare business with the government. And we were constantly bidding on VA contracts and constantly bidding on TRICARE contracts. And it wasn't out of the ordinary to see call centers or other types of service type opportunities set up in areas where a congressional leader may have provided some information or may have helped a particular health plan, not just Health Net, but a lot of particular health plans secure government contracts. You see it a lot, and it's defense contracts, where next thing you see is the individual that may be on the defense committee. All of a sudden they get something that, for their constituents, and maybe it's a senator and constituents in their home state, and the next thing you know, it's tied back to some entity securing a government contract. So again, it goes back to rent seeking, and that's one of the ways that economists are one of the ways that monopolists try to secure and try to expand that barriers to entry. Public policy toward monopoly. Competitive firms are price takers. Monopolies are price setters. They're economically efficient. They produce too little. They charge too much. Rent seeking, again, is a concern. High price, inefficiency, persistent profits. And that is why public policy keeps a close watch on monopolistic power and how a monopoly in a given market is functioning. And I told you that that down toward the end of the chapter, and it may not be the last page in the chapter, but it was right before the problems and some of the discussions. They have a little chart in there that does actually a pretty good job, comparing perfect competition with monopolies or monopolistic competition. And the first characteristic they talk about is the market. And again, perfect competition, large number of buyers and sellers, easy entry exit, homogeneous product. Monopoly, one seller, entry blocked, large number of buyers. On the demand and marginal revenue, the firm demand curve in a perfectly or a pure competition market or a competitive market, it's horizontal at the market price. The market curve is downward sloping, and marginal revenue curve is below the market demand curve in a monopoly market. So horizontal firm demand curve, downward sloping firm demand curve in the monopoly market. Price and marginal revenue are set with this horizontal in the competitive market. Marginal revenue, remember we talked about, you've got your downward sloping demand curve and your marginal revenue downward sloping curve, and it is twice as steep. So it's going to cut that x-axis halfway between the origin and where the downward sloping market demand curve cuts it. Price on a perfect competition. Price is equal to marginal cost set by supply and demand. Firms are price takers. In a monopoly, price is greater than marginal cost. Determines price, and they're a price setter. Profit maximization, firms produce marginal revenue equal marginal cost in a perfect competition. In a monopoly, produce where marginal revenue equal to marginal cost and charge corresponding price based on the downward sloping demand curve. Profit, entry forces economic profit to zero in the long run in a perfect competition world. In a monopoly, entry blocked, economic profits are maintained in the long run. Efficiency, price is equal to marginal cost, so equilibrium solution is efficient in a perfect competition world. In a monopoly world or a monopolistic world, equilibrium solution is inefficient because price is greater than marginal cost. And then lastly, they go into, or the authors go into, I'll call them kind of odds and ends, talking about monopolies. They talk about public policy, monopoly power, it's inefficient, and it's an inequitable solution, tend to charge high prices. Economies of scale, cost efficiencies, lower prices should be charged to consumers. Prevent behavior that explicitly reduces competition and creates monopolies. So rather than a normative approach where public policy said, this is the way it should be, these are some key concerns with public policy because this is the way it is. Fragility of monopoly power, given enough time, it disappears. Think about De Beers and the diamonds. They were the 800-pound gorilla for a number of years, and now that market is eroding because the market is not based on their control of those key inputs that they obtained in especially South Africa. Now they're finding diamond mines in other countries, synthetic diamonds. So it's eroding De Beers' monopolistic power. And again, entrepreneurs, they're like bloodhounds when it comes to sniffing out profits. And if they can find an economic profit somewhere, they're going to do everything they can to try to generate or try to develop. While they may not be perfect substitutes, they're going to be as close as possible substitutes to try to get into the market. And they're going to try to break down the barriers of entry so that they can enter that market, help compete the profits down, and then exit the market again. And that's going to wind it up on our chapter on monopoly and monopolistic power. The next time we get together, we will be in the middle of chapter 11. Thanks for joining.